But looking for solutions to this, colleges are obviously restricted in their ability to generate additional income, no ability to borrow or to hold reserves. Are these areas that you would be prepared to look at? And I think that takes us into the territory of ONS reclassification.
So the first thing I would observe is that to a greater or lesser degree, that's out with our hands. We can't direct the Office for National Statistics to determine how they will classify any entity. We didn't ask them to reclassify Scotland's colleges. That was a decision they took. Now, to be fair, there is a legitimate question as to whether or not we could adjust the setup of Scotland's colleges, incorporated colleges. Of course, not every college is incorporated, but the vast majority of them are. We could look at that to reconsider that proposition, although again, there'd be absolutely no guarantee that the ONS would not still say, well, actually, under the terms of their classification, they'd be classified as public bodies. My view is, on balance, that notwithstanding some of the challenges that we have, I think it is appropriate and correct that we continue to operate with the environment that we have in terms of how incorporated colleges are structured, something that has been in place for a long time. It largely emanates from a piece of legislation in 1993, so it predates devolution, let alone this administration. I think on balance, that is the correct formula in terms of the relationship we have with them being largely publicly funded. What I have committed to doing, and this was in response to the SFC review on sustainability, is to look at if there can be further flexibilities to try and help colleges better enable some of these challenges. That's something that we're committed to doing. That's something we're looking at with SFC, and it's something that I've committed to College of Scotland to looking at on an expedited basis, because I know they're looking for these things in fairly short order.
So going to put you on the spot there. I mean, you're talking about dealing with this on an expedited basis. How quickly do you think you would get to the point where you had identified whether there were flexibilities available to you to offer colleges, and whether you'd be prepared to make that offer?
So there are some flexibilities already being extended, of course, in terms of some latitudes for colleges in meeting their credit targets without clawback being implemented by the Scottish Funding Council. So right now, in the environment we have, we can operate some latitude, we can operate some flexibility. The question isn't, it's a reasonable question, it's one that's been posed of us, is can we go further? I'm committed to looking at that. It might be possible that there's something we can do in this current financial year, but certainly looking ahead to the next financial year, I think it's something that academic year, of course, Mr. Day. This academic year, we will look at it, but certainly by next academic year, I believe there might be more we can do.
Okay. As you're well aware, we have in recent times had very locality-specific issues with student accommodation for universities. I'm wondering about the government's role around this, perhaps starting off with a position around recording and monitoring the availability of student housing in relation to each university, and thereafter, when an issue arises, what dialogue and what role government officials have in engaging with these individual universities in seeking to achieve an appropriate outcome.
First of all, I'm glad I can hear you now, Mr. Day. Apologies for any confusion that existed before. I do perceive there to be a role for us. It isn't the leading one, though. We are not a direct provider of student accommodation. Never have been. There's never been a role for government in that regard, and I don't detect any sense that it should change. But that's not to say it isn't of substantial concern to me in terms of my ministerial responsibilities as well. It is something that I've engaged very directly with specific universities around, in particular the University of Glasgow, where there was a very widely reported situation. I got a degree of reassurance they were taking every step they could to work through any of the remaining issues they had at that stage. What we are committed to doing is taking forward a student accommodation strategy, which will be informed by the purpose-built student accommodation review that is underway. We recently commissioned evidence from the UK Collaborative Centre for Housing. That's now with us. That will be considered by the purpose-built student accommodation review steering group, and then we will of course publish it, and I'll be happy to directly write to the committee at the juncture that we do that. And that will form the considerations about what we might be able to do to try and make sure that there is better provision of housing for students. Of course, this is part of a wider challenge in terms of the pressure of availability of housing. I would reflect on some of the work that we've already done in terms of short-term lets, for example, and better enabling local authorities to regulate that market to ensure there is wider supply of housing for other groups who require it, students included. So there's action we can take. We can't take it alone. We have to work with the sector to make sure that they are living up to their responsibilities to ensure that the students they recruit can be adequately housed, and that's something we'll continue to work through with our student accommodation strategy.
One follow-up question on that, Minister. Obviously welcome the actions that you've identified, but given what we know from what happened this year, how optimistic would you be that this work can be progressed in conjunction with the universities at sufficient pace to hopefully ensure there be no repetition for the next academic year?
Well, it's work that's underway, and I certainly want to have it substantially advanced in advance of next academic year. It would be disingenuous to suggest some of these wider pressures that we're seeing are going to go away anytime soon. If you take the University of Glasgow as an example, when I spoke to them, they have plans to increase the own number of directly provided student accommodation. That's the type of response that I would hope to see in the sector. I recognise, though, that's not going to be achieved readily. That requires lead-in time in terms of planning application, in terms of construction and so on. But that type of activity has to start sooner rather than later. And of course, our own actions in terms of the student accommodation strategy have to as well.